Joining me to discuss, I'm still with Eric Mendel in studio, and joining us via Zoom, Gidi Greenstein, former peace negotiator under Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, as well as author of Insight: Peacemaking in the Oslo Process, 30 Years and Counting, and founder of the Root Group. Now, Gidi, it's great to have you with us as well. Eric, thank you for staying with me here in studio. Gidi, I do want to begin with you, because as I just explained, there are 3 ceasefires in place on paper. So tell me, why does peace feel nowhere in sight? In your opinion, what is missing most right now?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. And of course, you're setting the benchmark very high under the word peace. But I would like to just refer to the possibility of some political arrangement that end the conflict and create a foundation for further political progress in all 3 fronts. So let's just go from the Iranian front. Effectively, for Israel in Iran, I think we don't have leverage in the negotiations. We're not participant in the negotiations. The Americans are dealing directly with the Iranians, with the intermediary capabilities of Pakistan and other countries. So over there, whatever the agreement that is reached between the US and Iran, I think it will apply to Israel. In Gaza, we do have the 20-point plan of President Trump, which effectively created a 3-phase approach that ends with the Palestinian Authority extended back into Gaza and a discussion of what is called the political horizon and the right of self-determination of the Palestinians, basically in the West Bank and Gaza. The government of Israel does not have an alternative vision for Gaza, except for, as we can hear right now, of trying to stabilize the situation and basically holding on to the 53% of the Gaza Strip that we are holding to right now. In Lebanon also, we see in Israel's approach, which is to hold these security zones, including in Lebanon, including in Syria, and obviously holding on to these security zones will prevent an agreement. All of that brings us back to the Americans. And the determination of the Americans to get an agreement will actually establish whether there is a political resolution to these conflicts or not. In Lebanon, I think it's the lowest hanging fruit, because in Lebanon, the establishing a permanent border, internationally recognized and bilaterally agreed between Israel and Lebanon, is definitely an achievable goal. And if the Americans frame this as the goal of their diplomacy, I think it can be achieved. In Gaza, of course, it's a little bit more, it's much more complicated, because the condition for removing Hamas is the introduction of the Palestinian Authority, which is right now against the position of the Israeli government. So I think in Lebanon we can see progress. In Gaza it's more difficult. In Iran it's not in our hands.
Well, when it comes to the Palestinian front, we did see elections just held in the West Bank and in one Gaza city, Deir al-Balah, this one for the first time in 20 years. But Gidi, does this move Israelis and Palestinians closer to a viable peace process? Or even with these elections, does this just produce more fragmentation?
I think that I don't think that we are in anything that is remotely close to what we may call a peace process. And even according to the Trump 20-point plan, the deliberation on the resolution of the conflict, or even some sort of a long-term ceasefire, only begins in the second phase of the second stage of the second phase of Trump. So let's call it in year 3 of the arrangements in Gaza. And the process has been moving much slower than originally anticipated. So we're not in the process right now of discussing the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But I do want to mention that President Trump has delivered 2 very important documents. One, in January 2020, what was called the Trump Vision for Peace and Prosperity in the Middle East, the Peace and Prosperity Plan. And that document basically establishes the starting point for the discussions of the resolutions of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it is explicitly based on the principle of 2 nation states for 2 people. 5 years later, President Trump presents the 20-point plan for Gaza, and that plan too is based on the notion that there are 2 indigenous people between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, and there needs to be a political separation and a territorial compromise. Again, the principle of 2 nation states for 2 people. We know that the current position of the Israeli government is diametrically opposed to this fundamental principle. So we are stuck. And maybe the outcome of the elections in Israel next year or this year, later this year, will create the political and diplomatic space that may allow us to move forward again. Year 3 of the Trump plan may move forward with more significant negotiations on a resolution of the conflict.
Well, Eric, looking towards the future, especially of the year 3 of what's happening in Gaza, the Palestinian Authority does play into this, but how important is real reforms within the PA before any serious diplomatic track can even restart? I mean, can Israel, the United States, the region talk about peace if the PA is still seen as corrupt or ineffective?
Well, the first thing is I agree with Gidi. I think when Americans talk about peace and then talk about it in this region, I think we should disabuse ourselves that we're going to have any type of what American-style type of peace at the current situation. What I hear, and I'm doing this from an American perspective, is you're negotiating with yourself. You have adversaries. I remember when the Trump peace plan came out, which was actually a very complex document. Bibi actually agreed to it. I think Abbas had said no, no, and I think 1,000 times no. And that was one that was really well thought out to give some autonomy. They are maximalistic. And they are not trusted by the people. And the current most recent election had some Hamas checked who the people were running. And I think that was inconsequential. I wouldn't reactivate that front at this point. You have too many other things going on. I also agree with Gidi. The low-hanging fruit here is Lebanon in the sense of getting something positive, something the president could be proud of. But I'm not optimistic that Israel will be allowed to degrade Hezbollah to the point that Lebanon can take over. As far as Iran, I hate to sound like Bibi here, but Iran is the key here. If the Americans don't have a plan for regime collapse to regime positive change and to empower the Iranian people, and is just saying, I'm only about nuclear, I'm only about ballistic, we're going to be fighting this again and again. And again, you guys are living with an existential threat. Americans don't appreciate that. The only thing they appreciate are gasoline prices. So you have different, what you have in the game here is so much more than that. But I think one of the things that I want to just say one further thing, this all gets back to the U.S.-Israel relationship. And you're about to have a new memorandum of understanding. You have a real, a Rubicon has been crossed with Democrat senators against Israel for defensive weapons. I think that if there is a new government, they need to, or if there's even Bibi's leading a government, you have to prioritize the U.S.-Israel relationship for diplomatic cover, to be perceived as partners together for research and development, and doing that is a national security interest of Israel. And all these other theaters, which are not going to be pretty, you need to have a close relationship, and you should be reaching out now to Democrats who will be in the House, maybe controlling the Senate, and maybe controlling the White House in 2028.
Well, both of you are harping about how important it is for Washington. Washington is calling the shots here. But what about other regional powerhouses, specifically Saudi Arabia? Gidi, how does Riyadh play into any efforts toward peace in the region? Saudi's ambassador to Lebanon today said that Saudi Arabia needs to be center in rebuilding Lebanon, as well as curbing Israeli and Western overreach. Is there any way that Riyadh could be undermining Israeli peace efforts with other regional countries?
I think that the Saudis have a clear interest in being a pivotal player in any future arrangement, specifically in Syria and Lebanon. So we know that they have been investing billions and billions of dollars in the rebuilding of Syria. They're also now inching toward leaning in to enhancing their investment and involvement in Lebanon, because in their view, the future architecture, geopolitical architecture of the Middle East involves what is called the IMEC, the India Middle East Europe corridor. And that IMEC, which is sort of a corridor of energy and transportation, again, from India through the Arab Peninsula to Europe, can either go through Israel or it can go through Syria and Lebanon. And the Saudis are leaning into that corridor moving through Syria. So the stabilization of Syria and the development of Syria is extremely important for the Saudis. Now, when it comes to the Palestinians, the Saudis have made it very clear that they will not make progress on normalization with Israel until there is a prospect, until there is a horizon for the two-state solution. And in this respect, they're actually aligned with the Americans. I just want to offer your viewers the following idea. The architecture of American hegemony in the Middle East, which was created by Henry Kissinger in 1974, that led to the Israel-Egypt peace accords in 78-79, which later led to the Oslo process. It led also to the agreement between Israel and Jordan. It led to the Abraham Accords in 2020. That entire architecture is dependent on the quest, on the movement toward the principle of two nation states for two people between Israel and the Palestinians. And that is essential also for the stability of Jordan. Now, the current government in Israel has totally different ideas about the future of the region. And that's why Israel and the US are actually moving in the direction of some sort of a confrontation about the vision of the region. So in this respect, again, in that context, the Americans are totally aligned with the Saudis. So what we're seeing is that Israel is kind of moving itself into a diplomatic corner where its effect on a lot of these negotiations is decreased. I do just want to say something to what Eric said, to add to what Eric said. The Abu Mazen said no to the Trump plan of January 2020 as the end game. And what I said is that the Trump plan of January 2020, which Netanyahu actually framed as the deal of the century, is the starting point of the negotiations on the final resolution of the conflict, if and when we get there. But we do have a starting point for the negotiations that we didn't have before, offered by President Trump. And the last I'll say, the border agreement with Lebanon is a simple agreement. It's a real estate deal. And if the Americans lean in, they can get that deal. And that is a historic deal that will create a bilaterally agreed and internationally recognized border between Israel and Lebanon. I think it's also a huge achievement for Israel, but it's an essential stepping stone for future peace with Lebanon and also for the delegitimization of Hezbollah.
Well, a lot of interesting questions and solutions that you both pose. Gidi and Eric, a very important discussion to have. Thank you for being with me here on i24 News and talking about it all.
Thank you.